know what you're wondering. What's
Silksong's release date?
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. I'm only mucking about. Relax. As for what's
Silksong's release date?
it's best you don't ask.
So, after what feels like a small militia's worth of Nintendo Directs coming and going without presenting any Silksong news, I'm pretty sure it's safe to say that we're beating a metaphorical dead horse when it comes to hyping ourselves up for more information. It's pretty clear that Team Cherry just wants to keep their heads down to remain hard at work, so we'll probably get more news when they actually feel like they have something to say. And that's fair enough. But this means we've just got to accept that there will be an indefinite amount of time without more content for the Hollow Knight franchise. And although this may seem like nothing more than a blatant curse, it could very well be a blessing in disguise for those who desire something fresh to keep themselves occupied. And I can't think of anything better to fill this void than picking up a new game series. While Hollow Knight has been primarily recognized as a Metroidvania, Steam also puts it under the category of a Souls-like. And if you know anything about the Dark Souls franchise, this checks out completely. But after a few discussions during some of my live streams and a bit of digging through comments, it's apparent to me that Hollow Knight has been somewhat of a gateway title into the overall gaming world, allowing people who haven't played a whole lot of games to find something they actually ended up loving. On the other hand, there may be plenty of individuals out there who played Dark Souls religiously, but held out on Hollow Knight for no reason in particular. Regardless of what your situation may be, it's worth noting that these two games are eerily similar in concepts and gameplay aspects for how different they are fundamentally. They obviously offer two separate experiences overall, but there's still just enough common ground for me to at least suggest that if you loved one of them, there's a good chance you'll really end up enjoying the other. So if you've been looking for that one time filler to relieve you of your craving for something new, hopefully I can help you out a bit by explaining why you may be a secret Dark Souls fan after enjoying Hollow Knight. Or vice versa. Since there's way too much content in both games to explain every single tiny detail that may overlap between the two, we're going to break this discussion down into four major concepts: the story, the characters, the gameplay, and the experience. So let's kick things off with a brief delve into the story of Dark Souls. To make this as spoiler-free as possible, I'm going to put most of the emphasis on the ability Dark Souls has to tell its own story, rather than what the entire narrative actually is. At its core, there's actually a lot of recognizable elements in Dark Souls, which are shared with Hollow Knight's lore. An old land with great tales of gods and prosperity. A now dilapidated and dark world brimming with despair and some type of curse or plague. Even a nameless protagonist that's destined to challenge and ultimately shift the tides of fate. Both games present surprisingly grim stories with morbid motifs that explore relatively similar concepts. What's more significant, however, is the way that Dark Souls chooses to present various parts of its enigmatic plot. You see, Dark Souls is a franchise that has a reputation primarily for its difficulty. That's nothing new. But it does mean that most people aren't playing the game for the story alone. If the most casual of players who just beat the game was asked to explain the plot, my best bet is that their answer would be something along the lines of, "I didn't really pay attention to that," or, "I don't know, it was kind of hard to follow." Now, where could we have possibly heard something like this before? To me, this is simply because Dark Souls takes almost a thoroughly hands-off approach when it comes to storytelling. You can experience a ton of fun playing any game in the franchise and still know next to nothing about the lore. But much like the gameplay itself, which we'll get into soon, this game almost always goes out of its way to reward the curious player. Sure, talking to NPCs reveals incredibly cryptic and vague dialogue, which kind of gives you a clue as to why the hell you're actually doing what you're trying to do, but that's nowhere near enough to paint the full picture. Much of the game's narrative instead arises from item descriptions and in-game text, hidden just out of plain sight. Every single item or piece of gear, from the soul of a boss to a literal pile of shit, always provides you with some form of supplemental exposition. And once you start to piece everything together from various item descriptions, you feel like a goddamn medieval investigator, constantly craving another new item for more clues to the overarching story. As for more of a correlation to Hollow Knight itself, the last major component of the presented narrative comes from environmental storytelling. Every building, item placement, enemy location, and NPC interaction has some crucial and particular reason for being in its designated location. Nothing is designed by coincidence, and knowing this heavily adds to the sense of intrigue and desire for exploration while playing the game, because everything you come across will feel genuinely important. I should also note before moving on from this point that the lore itself is indeed worth every bit of time it takes to explore and read through. It's incredibly interesting and packed with elaborate details that come together gradually to make up a thoroughly compelling story. And if you ever get confused or want some deeper context for any particular subject, Dark Souls has its own dedicated lore sage to consult with right here on YouTube, so there's nothing to worry about there. Regardless of all that, everything we've covered so far suggests that the majority of the story comes in the form of text boxes and items themselves. So what's the deal with the bosses, enemies, and NPCs? Do they even matter? Well, let's be honest here. In terms of the gaming world, the franchises that are the most memorable almost always include compelling and likable characters within their stories. They don't even have to have complex backgrounds or motives, but there needs to be some captivating substance and personality for people to get attached to. Dark Souls understands this concept perfectly and successfully delivers fleshed out, well-designed characters. There's no shortage of amicability when stumbling upon Laurentius of the Great Swamp.
Pyromancy has a, well, rather primitive aspect to it. It meshes poorly with advanced culture, and pyromancers are considered rather unsavory. Which is fine, as I never got along with anybody anyway. So, for me, dirty undead didn't change a thing.
And no lack of peculiarity when freeing Knight Lautrec of Karim.
Thank you. Yes, sincerely. I am Knight Lautrec of Karim. I truly appreciate this. And I guarantee a reward. Only later.
Whatever role it is they may end up playing, all of the characters in Dark Souls possess a unique and distinct appeal, each with their own personalities and desires. No matter how minor or intentionally malicious they may turn out to be, the dedicated fanbase remains utterly enamored with the denizens of this game's world. But let's be fair, Hollow Knight has a lot going for its characters because of how unbelievably adorable most of them are. I mean, come on. Team Cherry even made little floating balls of dung look kind of endearing, and I still have no goddamn clue how they pulled it off. Dark Souls strays from this formula in the sense that most of the world's inhabitants are incredibly off-putting, both visually and behaviorally. Most of the characters look and sound gruff and grim to fit the dark undertone of the world, but even this adds to the charm of all the characters. It makes NPCs like Marvelous Chester or Trusty Patches incredibly appealing and mysterious. Sure, they present a less than benign persona to the player and have their own goals or ulterior motives in mind, but it's damn near impossible to hate them because their outward personalities are teeming with allure and charisma. And that's not to say there aren't any wholesome characters either. NPCs like the Onion Knight Siegmeyer of Katarina, or the jolly mascot of the franchise, Solaire of Astora, offer a stark contrast to the otherwise grisly atmosphere of Lordran. Through and through, these fellow undead outcasts prove that even in the most foreboding and dreary of game worlds, a few beacons of hope and positivity will always remain. By proxy, almost all of the bosses have their own backstories and badass presentations of personality that's easy for any fan of the series to sink their teeth into, even if these opponents never say a word. But to me, that's probably the biggest takeaway when it comes to summarizing the inhabitants of Dark Souls. The game always manages to say a lot about any given character with very little dialogue or in-your-face explanations. Much like Team Cherry, the developers at FromSoft have a knack for filling their fictional worlds with things that make us want to learn more. The general intrigue of characters in Dark Souls operates no differently here. As such, there's a plethora of contextual similarities between the inhabitants of these two series, and you'll only need a handful of seconds around each NPC to start noticing these parallels. So as far as the in-game world and its population goes, have no fear. There's just as much rich content and likable material to thumb through and immerse yourself with inside the world of Dark Souls as there is to be found in Hollow Knight. From a lore and world-building perspective, I can promise that this franchise won't let you down. Alright, so the story and characters are all well and good, but how does it actually feel to play the game itself? Is it even any fun, and are the rumors about its difficulty genuinely true? I'll just come out and give my SparkNotes version of this point so you have an idea of where I'm headed. Dark Souls only gets hard if you refuse to learn from doing things in the wrong way. That's it. In most other games, there's either some form of guidance that constantly nudges you in the right direction, or a lack of guidance overall because the game may not be incredibly demanding of particular skills. Beyond that, the only amounts of necessary learning are typically presented in the designated highlights of the game, like during a boss fight or a tough puzzle. Dark Souls, however, falls right in between these two paths for an experience that requires mechanical prowess from its players, but also offers little to no guidance over various crucial aspects of gameplay. And while Hollow Knight also offered very little insight over its more niche mechanics, it is nowhere near as complex as Dark Souls may seem at first glance. I mean, just take a look at the status sheet alone. Tons of numbers, terminology, and statistics that range from a little intimidating to borderline frightening for new players to look at. And although the starting area does possess a plentiful amount of tips from tutorial messages and some first-hand exposition, don't expect all of that to persist throughout the rest of the game, because immediately after you clear this area, you're essentially set loose to figure everything else out on your own. Once you reach Firelink Shrine, the game hands you the reins and lets you take total control of learning your own lessons. But even though Dark Souls has a lot more mechanical depth than Hollow Knight does, the same underlying theme of hands-on learning is what conjoins these two at the hip. Let's use an example to demonstrate what I'm referring to here. Hollow Knight's Mothwing Cloak allows you to dash in a horizontal line, and serves as a great defensive mechanic once the Shade Cloak upgrade is acquired, as it provides the knight with invulnerability frames during a dash. Even though it's incredibly simple to understand, the utility of the cloak can change drastically depending on the skill of the player, and a seasoned player can string this together with other movement abilities to beat the hardest bosses without taking any hits. In Dark Souls, players are given the ability to roll from the very beginning, and this roll also provides invulnerability frames to mitigate damage. But what the game doesn't tell you is that there are 3 main variations to a roll, all of which are lovingly named by the player base. The fat roll, the mid roll, and the fast roll. All of these dodge rolls vary in iframes and speed, with fat roll statistically being the worst and fast roll being the best. The major thing which determines what type of roll you have is your equip load statistic, or in simpler terms, the carry weight for all of the items you have equipped. New players will most likely notice this mechanic in action as they try out new armor sets or weapons that they find, leading them to the realization that everything you equip influences how effectively you can dodge attacks. But as these new players spend more time in-game, they'll eventually understand that the equip load has tons of interactions with other game mechanics. Your running speed and stamina recovery are also affected by your equip load as well. Upgrading the endurance statistic can actually increase your overall equip load. Certain accessories can increase your total equip load without having to level up any of your stats. By observing the singular mechanic of rolling, Dark Souls shows how various other parts of the game are interconnected at all times. In the same way Hollow Knight never tells players that there's a cooldown on Shade Cloak, or that Manus Claw and Pogoing refresh dash utility, Dark Souls never outright tells you about its own systems of mechanical interactions. The focus of the game still revolves around a self-sufficient player, except in Dark Souls, the expectations of how much you need to learn double or triple from that of what's expected in Hollow Knight. Even still, Team Cherry offers an incredibly streamlined and digestible take on this style of gameplay, which can also act as an exceptionally serviceable segue into FromSoft games. And just like with Hollow Knight, if you're willing to consistently learn from your deaths, experiment with mechanics, and mix things up if some of your tactics aren't quite working, you'll already be ahead of the curve by possessing the right mindset to efficiently take on a game like Dark Souls. Finally, we've reached arguably the most important concept in this discussion so far, the overall experience of playing Dark Souls. If I'm being completely honest, I genuinely don't think I would have liked Hollow Knight as much as I actually did if I hadn't played through the Dark Souls series beforehand, because of how much of an impression this franchise left on me after I finished each game. Experiencing the Souls games first helped me understand how much of a masterpiece Hollow Knight truly was. Prior to trying out Dark Souls, I'm truly convinced that I'd never played a game which forced me to actually grow as a person while playing it, as weird or ridiculous as that may sound. Hell, I even gave up for a few months after the first time I played it because I thought it just wasn't worth all the effort. But at their core, Hollow Knight and Dark Souls are games about failure. They're about not being good enough so that there's always room for improvement, always a chance to learn more or try something new, and to prove to yourself that you can overcome anything you put your mind to. But to overcome the obstacles in your way, you have to understand your own shortcomings. Are you very impatient in most situations? Do you get easily irritated by difficult challenges? Will you lose motivation when you come across something that requires you to think entirely for yourself, or feel the need to quit when the conditions get a bit too complex? Dark Souls brought some unfavorable personal qualities out into the open for me to see clearly, and I ended up walking away from a game I didn't think could ever be topped because of how much I felt tested as a person, not just a customer of another video game. After just a few brief moments of being in the world of Hallownest, I immediately knew that I would love Hollow Knight because it simultaneously disciplined and rewarded players in the exact same ways that Dark Souls did. Each area is a new challenge. All of the bosses serve as some type of skill check, and every death is a chance to prove that you can build upon your previous mistakes. From everything I've experienced, it's almost eerie how well both franchises capture these motifs to provide some unforgettable adventures that truly highlight the beauty and power of video games. So believe me when I say that if you really loved Hollow Knight and haven't tried Dark Souls yet, it just might be worth your time to take the plunge into the world of Lordran as well. Plenty of fresh challenges await, and should you choose to face these challenges head on, I genuinely hope that you get as much enjoyment out of the game as I did.